Good evening to all. Welcome again for session 2. I see some new participants who perhaps could not attend the first one, but I do hope that you get a chance to see the first video because that's going to create some kind of a setting for our discussion. So I thought, since this is going to be recorded, it's also going to be put on YouTube, I thought of sharing a few administrative points which can help all of us to revise some of these concepts. Also, there is a limitation in terms of, even if I were to project some Excel files here, there's nothing like actually you experiencing them yourself. So what we're going to do is, when we upload this second video, and the same thing we'll do for video 3, video 4, we'll also give you a Google Drive link in which all the Excel files which I'm going to use today, you can actually go and download for your own benefit. And at that time, if you again watch the YouTube video with the file with you, perhaps you can make even better sense of what I'm going to present to you. So, for your information, the module 1 has already been uploaded on 2 websites. Utkarsha Mandal Vereparle is one of the YouTube channels, not websites, on YouTube channels. And my own channel is Dr. Abhijit Fadnis. So the video of module 1 has been uploaded already. And whatever points I had made last time, that I have already created videos on this subject, that subject, all those links have been provided in the respective description boxes. So you can easily locate, for example, the SIP video is available in the description box of video uploaded on Utkarsha Mandal website, as well as, again I'm saying website, on the YouTube channel and my own YouTube channel as well. So whatever points are coming up for discussion, you will be able to easily take advantage of actually going to those YouTube videos also and making the best of it, out of it. For example, last time I talked about, on the periphery, not in great detail, about why I don't personally subscribe to the idea of SIP. And I just made a couple of points. But there are many more points. As I had mentioned last time, practically every argument in favor of SIP, I have actually given a counter argument. So for you to actually take the full advantage, kindly have a look at those respective YouTube videos. So session 2, session 3, session 4 is all investing. We talked about loans, savings, insurance last time. I'm going to basically cover today a couple of very interesting points. One is bond arithmetic, some introduction to that, which is what I promised last time. Concept of time value of money. We all learned that in the school, but we don't put it to practice much. We do practice a little bit, but it's a simple but very, very powerful concept which can be used. Towards the end, I am going to show you how even that concept can be used for assessing the equity market levels. So quite often people think that, 18,500 Nifty was very high, So how do we assess whether it's high enough? Is there a tool? Yes, there are many tools available. Quite often people use price earnings as one of the measure for assessing whether the market is high or low. But I have been using a technique which I developed a couple of years ago, on which I have already created a video, but I'll give you a flavor of that today. And again, anybody interested more in that subject, you can definitely, I'll provide the link both on the Utkarsha Mandal YouTube channel as well as my own channel. So you can actually go and see that video also. Again, as I mentioned last time, many of my videos have downloadable Excel files. So if you go to that YouTube video, you can again find another link there where you can download an Excel file and actually view that file on your own laptop. So the objective is that more and more people benefit from it. That's the objective. So I have covered this point as well. And for today's talk again, in another 3-4 days, we'll upload the YouTube video. So you'll also be able to revise it. Okay, so the Excel-based files also I have already spoken about. Um, so let's get going with the content for today. So we have some very interesting topics today, including constructing simple portfolios. Last time I mentioned that it's actually your asset allocation and your ability to manage risks in different asset classes which improves your return potential. So, like I mentioned that in my own case, in spite of a lot of uncertainties in my personal income streams, I'm 96% exposed to equity markets, right? That's because I have at least studied how I can manage that risk better, right? And some of that is going to come up in session 3, session 4, which are the simpler ways you can manage your risk. All that is going to come up. So the point is, if we are able to understand risk in asset classes and simplify our investments can really become more powerful. So as I shared with you, the weighted average return, again on that subject, again there is a detailed video, the link to which I have already provided in the description box. You will find that actually it's our ability to allocate to high return assets that improves our weighted average return. And what really matters is, what is our weighted average return? It doesn't matter how much return you generate on your equity portfolio if your equity portfolio is only 20% of your investments. However high that return is, it doesn't make really much impact. But if you are able to manage the risk and improve your allocation to equities, then the weighted average return will significantly improve. That's the simple philosophy that we have. So the theme about simplifying investments is that in search of returns, unfortunately what happens is we get into a very wide diversification, because some very reputed analyst talks about some stock and we get into investing that. Okay, no harm in investing 25,000, 30,000 there, right? And that's how we keep on accumulating so many assets. And then finally we wonder what to do with all of them. And typically when it's a good time to exit from the market, we wonder which one to sell, because all of them are small investments and you feel like, oh, I should not sell this because this is a precious jewel, with the result that you don't sell any of those. And then when the market has a downturn, we suffer from a significant price drop. So anyway, I told you that I'm going to share my own story. I have, of course, as a part of my introduction, you were told about my national ranks in various professional exams, but that's the courtesy anybody extends when you're introduced. But I began with a failure in CA entrance exam. So perhaps I'm the only student in the history of CA Institute who failed in CA entrance but got rank in inter and final, right? Similarly, I miserably failed in investing the first time I tried it, right? I had massive losses, the story about which I'll tell you in session 3 or 4, so you continue to come. So that's the incentive for you to come, right? So I booked quite massive losses. I think with those losses, anybody would have run away from the markets, but I did not run away. I said, I'm not going to run away, I'm going to recover all my losses. So it took 3 years for me to recover those losses. Thereafter, I've been compounding very well. So one of the learnings was that my investing was very complicated. I had too many stocks and the selection was good, but I had no understanding of the animal called as market. So what we need to also understand is that animal called as market. Last time we did see some trends, right? We did see some trends in interest rates, in gilt yields, then oil and gold. And of course, we're going to see next time the equity markets and so on. But the point is, if you are able to simplify our investments, that becomes more purposeful. It's based out of conviction, and it is not like, typically what happens is you stand in the queue for buying a ticket. Your queue is not moving. Then you find somebody else's queue is moving faster. You change your queue and go into that queue. Then you realize the queue you were in has started moving faster, right? The same thing happens with stocks sometimes, that your stock is not moving, and then you move out of that stock to some other stock, and your stock starts moving, right? So it's really the conviction. Sometimes, like a stock that I'm currently buying, it's giving a lot of pain, right? But I'm continuing to buy it, right? In spite of whatever pain it's inflicting on me, because it's out of conviction that I'm buying, right? That's what matters. So once you simplify it, right, it becomes easier. And therefore, we start getting more time for understanding how an asset class behaves rather than an individual asset. So we don't have to then hunt too much for asset selection or stock selection. Of course, that's important. We're going to talk about that in session 3. But even with a limited number of stocks, like I told you, I have only 5 stocks, I'm able to generate superior returns because of the conviction with which I have bought them. And therefore, there's a lot of noise happening around me in terms of exciting stocks. People call and tell me, but I just don't give any heed to it because it's not worth my time. I would rather buy limited number of stocks out of conviction and make a better return out of it. Like I mentioned last time, I made a distinction between party talk investing and investing for returns. Party talk investing is I get into a party discussion and I tell people about how much I know about companies, right? It's all half-baked information, not worth really taking an investment decision, but I like to talk about it, to impress people. But my returns, I only know, right? The point is, why should I waste time on talking about things which I don't even have time, and I must admit that I don't have time, and I would rather simplify investing, focusing on a few assets. Trying to understand how an asset class behaves. Why does a market behave the way it behaves, right? Why do you find supply at times? Why do you find demands at times? How does information play out in price? Why are there certain surges which dissipate? So once you start observing it, you will actually find that your investing is simple and more enjoyable and something which can give you superior returns, right? So it's important to understand that. Also, last time I mentioned that sometimes the advisors tell us that, this debt fund is not performing, let's switch to another debt fund, right? But the problem is that no debt fund is going to perform forever. It's going to have a lull period. As we discussed last time, as we're going to discuss today more, it is a function of the interest rate movement. Your return on your debt fund is going to be inversely related to the underlying interest rate movement. So once we understand that, even if you switch from one debt fund to another, it's not going to make any difference. You're going to be from one boat to another boat. So, there's no point in wasting our time. So we know that there is a certain period which is not going to give us return in a certain asset class. It does not mean that we have to necessarily sell. Like what I'm going to show you, some of the portfolios that I have constructed for my own relatives, very defensive portfolios, very limited equity exposure, right? So it does not mean that I keep on switching from one asset class to another. But you construct a portfolio in such a way that it self-balances. So that I'm going to show you today anyway, right? And I'll put those Excel files into the Google Drive for you to download and study it more, right? So what I observe is investors quite often spend a lot of time in stock selection. And they do it for too many stocks. Time for stock selection is important. But trying to apply mind for 30 stocks, 40 stocks, 50 stocks is impractical. I have worked in investment banking industry. Most well-paid analysts can cover at the most 1 or 2 sectors and about 5 to 10 companies. So when I'm busy in my own profession and I have limited time to study stocks, I think it can only be ego which can suggest that I can track so many stocks. It's practically impossible. So once we realize the limitation that we as retail investors have, we can come out with very practical ways of investing, some of which I'm going to share as we go along. So we already talked about this trends part. Now, what I want to do is briefly talk about mutual funds as a way of investing, because a lot of us invest in mutual funds. And again, here also I want to show you some data, because a lot of us sometimes get misguided, or sometimes there is a vested interest in promoting certain kind of funds which are not necessarily good for us. So I want to show you some data there again, right? So what is mutual fund as a way of investing? a common pool of money, that's mutual fund, in which investors place their contributions. And these are in accordance with a stated objective of that particular fund or scheme. So objectives can include what asset class or classes, what is the kind of duration for which this investment is going to happen, what is the risk profile, geography, and so on. Right? The ownership of the fund is joint or mutual. It belongs to all investors collectively. And a single investor's ownership is naturally a small fraction of the overall fund, so to the extent of the contribution. Right? Typically, units are bought and sold at the net asset value. Again, I have created a lot of videos on how is an NAV calculated and things like that, which of course you can explore. Very quickly, mutual fund types. We can classify mutual funds by their nature of investments. So there could be financial assets like equity, bonds, money market funds, or combinations of them like balance funds and so on. You could have physical assets like gold, precious metals, real estate. You could have by geography, domestic assets which are India-centric, or you could have now what has become more prevalent over the last couple of years, exposure to global assets. By intermediation, now this is something very important. I'm sure many of you are already aware, but under the chairmanship of Mr. C.B. Bhave, SEBI took a very important decision that investors who don't have to go through an advisor can take advantage of direct schemes, right? And those who want to use the services can use the regular schemes. So typically you will find that a regular scheme, the NAV will be slightly lower than the NAV of the direct scheme. This is because over a period of time, the performance of the direct scheme would tend to be better than the performance of the regular scheme. Because as we're going to see with some data, the expenses which are charged to a direct scheme are relatively less as compared to which are charged to a regular scheme, because regular scheme involves brokerage to be paid to the advisors. I'm not saying advisor in a narrow sense, I'm saying in a wider sense. You can call them as distributors, etc. Again, there is a conflict of interest between people who are actually supposed to advise and they should not be involved in any broking, ideally. So I'm just saying in a very generic sense. But my suggestion is that if you don't really need an advisory, then you should invest in a direct scheme. If you need advisory, obviously you go through an advisor, and then the advisor will put your money through a regular scheme, not through a direct scheme. Because obviously only through regular schemes, the advisor will be able to get a brokerage out of it, which is fair enough for his or her services. But what we also need to note is the expense ratios which are charged to these direct and regular schemes. And unknowingly, we should not invest in regular schemes. If you're doing it through knowledge, no problem. But for example, when I invest money for my relatives, there is no broker involved. And when I open their forms, I clearly tell them that I have zero vested interest in this. So when your form is being filled, in the place of the agent, we are going to write direct there, which means that you will take advantage of the direct scheme with no brokerage whatsoever involved. So naturally, their returns will be 0.25 to 0.5% better than a regular scheme, right? Diversification. So you could have equity scheme which participates in the entire market, wider market. So it's for the fund manager to decide which sectors the fund manager would like to allocate your money, or there could be a specific sector for which a scheme has been created. It could be a banking fund, it could be a technology fund, it could be an infrastructure fund, or it could be in a specific foreign geography technology fund. So again, you can have combinations across geography and sectors, or it could be geography and wider market. So you can create combinations like that. Then by horizon, an open-ended fund is the one where you can continue to buy or sell those units with the mutual funds for as much time as the scheme exists, right? Sometimes the fund houses reorganize some of these schemes, merge them, because SEBI also wanted these fund houses to streamline. They created so many schemes that it started creating confusion in the minds of investors. So SEBI asked them to merge schemes. So the number of schemes have come down. But as long as the scheme exists, you can continue to buy or sell the units. In a close-ended fund, that is not possible. So once those units are created, then you can either exit through specific exit window provided by the mutual fund, or that fund gets listed on the stock market. And that's where it gets traded like a share. So you may have heard about Nifty Bees, for example. So it's a close-ended fund which tracks the Nifty, and you can buy or sell like a share. So that's a close-ended fund, right? It's created once and it is not available for further purchase or further sale with the mutual fund house, right? So that is another way we can classify it. Then the other important thing is the fund management strategy. So it could be managed fund or it could be an index fund. I think I briefly touched upon this last time, that typically managed funds, only about 8 to 20% funds outperform the index, and 80 to 90% funds underperform the index. So if that is the situation, for my relatives, I prefer, and whenever I was invested in a mutual fund, I don't have much investment in a mutual fund any longer. I would always invest in an index fund. And I'll talk about more about that as we go along, why I prefer an index fund, right? So we will talk about it. Okay. So what is the care that you need to take when you invest in mutual funds? Some of that I have already talked about. One of the things which I mentioned last time also, quite often schemes get announced when that particular asset class has done exceedingly well for last 3-4 years, right? Like I mentioned last time that gold schemes were launched in 2012 when gold had done exceedingly well in the previous few years. So quite often people think that I am getting this unit for 10 rupees, right? For us that 10 rupee face value is such sacrosanct that we go and invest in a scheme thinking that it's available at par, as if there's no premium on it. But as I'm going to talk about, it really doesn't matter. If gold takes a downturn, that 10 rupees is going to become 8 rupees, or it's going to become 7 rupees. Just like 2000 rupees will become 1800 rupees or 1500 rupees, 10 rupees is also going to behave in the same way. So this new fund offer business actually is not something that we should fall prey to. So what we have to be very careful is, as I mentioned last time, start looking at those long-term charts and try to rationalize why a particular asset class is behaving the way it is behaving. And then take a careful decision whether you want to really go after it right now or you would like to wait and observe for some more time, right? So as I mentioned, don't get excited with this new fund offer business. It is the returns that matter. 10 rupee unit becoming 11 rupees is the same as a 4,000 rupee unit becoming 4,400, right? You not got the first one cheap, you not got the other one in at a very high price, right? It is the return potential that really matters. So for example, if you feel like investing in a Nifty index fund based on our discussion, don't worry about whether the NAV of scheme offered by SBI mutual fund is higher or lower than that of HDFC mutual fund. What you have to really check is the expenses which are being charged by the mutual fund house. That's all that matters. And we are anyway going to see that data as we go along, right? So that is something you need to check. Just because the NAV and therefore your purchase price of a particular unit is going to be higher in a particular mutual fund need not be the reason for you to refrain from investing there. You can go ahead and invest there because the NAV does not matter. It is the return potential that really matters. I hope I'm clear about it, right? Of course, we can handle Q&A at the end anyway. My suggestion is stay away from complicated products. So, for example, I don't like investing in a balance fund because I have no surety about how much money is going to go into equities, how much is going to get into bonds. I would rather have clean schemes. One which is into equities, I know exactly how much money I'm going to put in there. If it is going to be bonds, I know so much money is going into bonds. And I know whether I'm going to invest right now or I'm not going to invest in bonds right now. Like I explained to you last time, that in my view, right now is not the best time to invest in bond funds. For the reason that the interest rates are likely to inch up. And if they are likely to inch up, bond prices are likely to fall. So why should I put money into a bond fund? Now, if you put money into a balance fund, whether you like or not, your money is going to get into a bond portfolio of that fund. So why do you want to have a combined scheme? Have it clean and separate. So you know that this is the best time to get into equity, put money into the equity scheme. You think this is the best time to get into bonds, put that money into the bond fund. Don't get into or multi-cap, then all kinds of schemes mutual funds like to come out with. Right? I stay away, or at least I recommend we stay away from complicated products. As simple the products, the better it is for us. Okay. SIP, I don't have to repeat. Maybe I'm a little headstrong about SIP, so you can take a little independent view about it. But look at my video and then, form your opinion. So focus on understanding the factors that drive prices in asset classes than hair splitting on specific asset. जैसे मैं last time भी मैंने कहा था 19-20 इतना चिंता मत करिए. It is the timing which matters in my view. And again, we'll see how this can be done. But after the 4th session, if there is some way we can accumulate your email addresses, and if you are able to email a learning note to you, I'll be very happy to, send it to Ajay ji, who is the secretary of Utkarsh Mandal. He can arrange to distribute it to you, so that you have a document which you can revise some of these concepts, or you can do it through YouTube videos as you like. So my suggestion is create simple portfolios, and I'm going to show you some of the portfolios that I have constructed for my relatives. Again, quickly, the principles are open-ended funds, direct schemes, index fund in case of equities. I'll explain why I prefer index fund a little later. Distribute across 4, 3 or 2 schemes. Now you would wonder what kind of diversification are we talking about? Just 4, just 3, just 2 schemes. The portfolios that I have created for my relatives, they are very elderly people, late 70s, early 80s. So there are 4 schemes. As I'm going to show you, you can actually dynamically manage your portfolio in only 2 schemes. And I'll talk about it. You don't have to get anything more than that. Our maid servant, she's like a daughter to me. I manage her portfolio only in 2 schemes, right? Where I dynamically manage her money. And dynamic doesn't mean that you have to do something every day. You have to do something once in a year, right? Or maximum twice in a year. That's the only dynamic thing that you need to do. With that, you can generate significant returns. So she generates 16% returns, 15.5 to 16%, right? Which is big thing for her. Otherwise, she's already lost money in some cooperative bank, as I told you last time, perhaps, right? So we have already spoken about this. And observe the market movements and invest. Don't go for SIP. So now I'll show you 2 portfolios of 4 that I have created for very elderly people. And I don't do any intervention in them on an ongoing basis. This is something which has been created, and I just observe, and every 15 days I have been just send them this document saying that this is an updated file. So I'll just show you that. Let me close this file and open two portfolios. Let me open the first one. I update it every 15 days. So this was updated on 15th of November. The returns would be slightly different now because of, so let me try and make it a little bigger so that you are able to see it. Kindly give me a second. Is this more visible? Yes. So there are investments into 4 schemes, and I'll tell you the rationale of this. Um, so first is a money market fund. Last time I mentioned to you that as the interest rates have now started rising, the money market funds will start giving a better return than they have given in the past 1.5 years. Because after the onset of COVID, money market funds, the first name that you can see, cash management fund, savings plan, is a money market fund which invests typically in short-term instruments. Like you may remember, last time I had shown you a chart of 91-day treasury bills issued by the central government. In that chart, you would have seen that there was a significant fall just on the onset of COVID. And after that, the chart also is showing a rising trend. So what happened in the money market? That was a time when there was hardly any demand for credit. People were conserving their resources. There was no question of any company undertaking expansion. There was hardly any demand for credit. Banks were running with surplus money, right? Interest rates, short-term interest rates collapsed to as low as 3%, right? Gradually they have started increasing. Now, during last 1 year, 1.5 years, money market funds gave very bad returns, right? But I have not sold them. I have not switched any of their money from money market fund to either gilt fund or the credit risk fund, about which I'll explain, right? I have held them steady because I know that a time will come when money market funds will start giving higher returns, and that time has started now. I explained to you last time how from that chart interest rates are going to rise now, so money market funds will start again giving better returns. But where the return is going to go lower are the next two schemes. Those next two schemes, you can see credit risk debt fund. This credit risk debt fund is what? It invests in bonds issued by companies. And therefore it is called as a credit risk fund. What is credit risk? You invest in something and there is a risk of default. Because it's like lending money to somebody. When you lend money to somebody, there could be a default. So when you are investing in a credit risk oriented mutual fund, credit risk fund or debt fund or a corporate bond fund, these are nomenclatures which can be interchangeably used. There, the returns on your scheme is going to be inversely related to the interest rates. So I have one scheme where it is going to be directly related to interest rates, and there are two schemes where it is inversely related to interest rates, right? So there is some kind of a balancing which happens across these schemes, and I don't have to keep on switching money from one to the other. So now is the time when the scheme 2 and scheme 3 are not going to give good returns. But if I were to sell them, what is going to mean for them is that they'll have to get into tax compliances. Capital gains has to be calculated, that has to be paid. No, they are not all interested in that. What they are interested is their money is secure, it is growing steadily. That's all that they are concerned about. Correct? So finally we have to create a portfolio according to their need and the amount of intervention that we want to do with it. Okay? So gilt fund, as I explained last time, gilts are government securities issued by the central government or state government. So the level of risk involved in a gilt scheme is less than a corporate bond oriented scheme. But naturally the rate of return is also going to be slightly lower there. But I didn't want them to be exposed totally to a corporate oriented, a high credit risk kind of environment, and naturally therefore I have allocated some part of the money to gilt fund, right? And then there is this index fund. So we'll actually see some data in terms of the return that the index funds have given. But here, some more data for you. And again, this is a file which I will make available for you to download and study yourself. Okay? There is another video that I have created in terms of how you can use this file for populating your own records also. Right? So there is again a separate video, the link to which I'll share. There is a downloadable file in which you can actually populate your data. So automatically you will have your own file which will give you this kind of a summary whenever you need. Right? Now what is the kind of returns that they have given? Okay. So remember, the first row is about the money market fund, right? It has given 6.63% quarterly compounded return. Quarterly compounded. If you were to be annually compounded, the rate of return would be higher than this. It would be a little more than 7% or even 7.1, 7.2%. Because if you compound too quickly, it will show you a relatively lower rate of return. If you compound it once in a year, it will show you higher rate of return. For example, many advisors, or if you see some data, you get data on XIRR, right? This XIRR is annually compounded, and therefore XIRR will tend to show you higher return. Suppose the same data was plotted and you had calculated XIRR, it would actually show you better return than what I'm showing here. I'm actually showing here on quarterly compounded returns, right? And in the details, if you see towards the bottom, column F and G bottom, even daily compounded returns have also been provided for every investment. So I'll come back to this, but if you see here, the entire records are available for this particular scheme. Why is it not scrolling down? Okay, we'll see. The point I was making was, it wants me to cover the return part first without worrying about the details. But as you will see in this file, actually every day's record has been kept at the bottom. So it's not a summary that I have prepared for sending to them. It is all that I do is I input the date as of which I have got the NAV, and I put the NAV. Then the whole calculation is built in there. So once you build a record, anytime it's like a dashboard that you can see. What was your cost? How much is the value? What is the kind of return? Now mutual funds also give that to you, but mutual funds don't give you for each of your investment what is the return that you got at that time. And timing, as I was mentioning, is very important. So as a student of the market, it is important for us to know if our judgment about a past investment was not right because we timed it wrong, right? So for that, I need every investment data. So here you may see that the total cost is 28,40,000, but perhaps there were 35 transactions which have summed up into 28,40,000. So 28,40,000 has grown into value to 39,44,000, and the average investment that you can see here in cell D6 is 16th of September 2016. So it's a 5-year-old average fund that I have created. So 60,30,000 which was invested down to 91,17,000 with an overall return of 8.06%. And I have been observing for the last so many years that the return has been in the range of 8% to about 8.25. That's where it has been moving. So for a senior citizen, this is fine. 6%, on a time deposit, and again you worry about reinvestment. Here it works smoothly. No hassle about TDS and filing of tax return. This is practically tax-free unless they actually get into selling, right? So now this is where you will find that the risk profile is also indicated. So first one is very low risk, second one is moderate risk, third one is moderate risk, and fourth one is moderately high risk. So index fund is not a very high risk, it's a moderately high risk. Why it is moderately high risk? Let me spend a little bit of time on index fund. Index fund does not give the liberty to the fund manager to apply his or her mind. It makes invest in a particular set of scripts which form a part of the index. Now this index fund is a Nifty index fund. So the fund manager has no choice but to invest in the top scripts which actually form the Nifty, right? And the return, now remember by 15 September the market had already started correcting. It has corrected further, so it may have come down from 15.52 to about 14.5 possibly, or even a little lower, but it will recover again, right? So this is a fund which I wanted to show you. Now let me show you another fund which is a little larger than this. Okay, so I'll not again go line by line, the same 4 schemes, nothing different. Here again let me increase the size a little bit so that it's visible to you a little better. Interestingly, the rate of return here also is 8.05. But basically, it again varies. It has been varying. Here, the equity exposure is relatively larger. But if you see the index fund return, it is 19%, right? Which is not bad for a senior citizen. And the allocation here is also not small. In fact, there were some mishaps in the family because of which I stopped allocating to equities. But my last allocation was in March 2020, just when the onset of COVID. If things would have become, nothing had happened in the family, I would have continued to switch more money, and then the return would have been even far superior. But about 1 crore 16 lakhs has grown to about 1 crore 58 lakhs. The average date of investment, on an average, the whole portfolio was invested less than 4 years ago. So considering that, it has quite nicely grown without much intervention. The only intervention I do is, or I was doing up to March 2020, was gradually switch money into index fund. This is something you can do to, once you have a better grip on your understanding of the market, gradually you can start allocating more and more to index fund in a controlled way rather than through an SIP route. So for example, I mentioned that in last session also, and we'll see some data why I'm saying so, that again a good opportunity is emerging in investing in equity markets in India, right? So if you are putting money to work right now, index funds can again give you good returns over a period of time, right? So let me go back to the PPT part. Okay. Now, let me elaborate a little bit about the simpler ways in which you can even simplify this further, right? So, the portfolio 1 that you just now saw consisted of 4 schemes: money market fund, credit risk fund, gilt fund, and an index fund. A simplification that you can do, suppose you don't want to have any exposure on corporates in the form of credit risk. You would rather take the exposure on corporates through the index fund, right? So either you take an exposure on a company by lending money to it, or you can take an exposure on a company by investing in it, right? Now, if you're going to invest in the index fund, and again, I'm going to show you some interesting data a little later in terms of why personally I think, index fund is a good idea. Then what you can do is you can cut down in your second portfolio, or you can graduate from portfolio 1 to portfolio 2, where you need not have the corporate or credit risk at all in your portfolio. Because you're going to take exposure on companies, you build that exposure through index fund. So there are 2 ways you put money to work. You lend money or you invest money. Lending money is like keeping a fixed deposit or investing in bonds. Investing in bonds is also actually lending money, if you think about it, right? So instead of lending money, you can think of investing money, and that's where you can increase your allocation to index funds, and therefore you can only have 3 schemes. Again, you can have them in one mutual fund. You don't have to go to multiple mutual funds. So all the 4 schemes that I showed you are in one mutual fund house. So I don't worry about that 19-20. I rather worry about the asset allocation, and if at all I have to move money from money market fund to index fund, what is a good time to move money? That is more important rather than trying to worry about, that small difference, because it becomes like the train ticket window where you keep on running from one to the other and it's not going to serve any purpose. What I'm doing for our maid servant is only 2 schemes: money market fund and an index fund. Now this actually can provide potentially a very, very significant opportunity, provided, as I mentioned last time, you don't have a very strong tax saving obsession. Okay, so what I mean thereby is, if you are open to paying taxes rather than holding on to an investment. So I'm personally very happy to book profits and very happy to pay taxes, rather than not to book profits and not to pay taxes. So it's a question of mind blocks sometimes. So I am in that category where I'm happy to pay taxes and I'm happy to book profits. If you are willing to do that, then this can provide a wonderful opportunity to you. How? I'll give you an example. And I'll elaborate on that example a little more when I show you the tool which I have been using for assessing the market levels. Again, I'll show you with data. So for example, when there was this so-called economic crisis arising out of demonetization, right? Market had corrected. If some of you are following the market, Nifty level was 7,900 level that time. I'm talking about December 2016. November, December 2016. That was a great time to move money into an index fund, right? Again, the timing aspect will come to a little later. But take for now that was a good time to invest in index fund. So I invested a lot of money in index fund that time, right? And the market rallied from December 2016, 7,900 Nifty, February 2018, 15 months later, it was 11,300. 7,900 to 11,300 in 15 months time. Okay. Now, if you hold on to it, there is a possibility that because market is like a pendulum. So imagine a pendulum. Reality is right in the middle, right? But the pendulum keeps on shifting in both directions. When there is more greed, it starts moving towards a greedy kind of a situation. When there is more fear, it starts moving towards the fear direction. The reality is somewhere in the middle. Reality is not as bad as people who are fearful think, and reality is not as good as people who are very gung-ho about the future they think, right? Reality is somewhere in the middle. So if you are convinced that you can actually start understanding and following the market and use the tool which I'm going to share with you, you can start getting a sense of where the market is, right? So I put in money into an index fund and I exited at about 11,300. That time there was no long-term capital gains tax. 31st of January 2018 was the cutoff. So maximum of your rally was covered without payment of any tax, luckily. But even if there was no cover for tax, I would have still been happy to pay that tax. Because there's no point in that 11,300 again melting down and I'm not taking advantage of it. Rather, I would take advantage of it. Now, this is the typical behavior of the market, right? And as we start observing the market, and that's why I said earlier that instead of worrying too much about a specific asset, start investing more time about an asset class. That's where you will ensure 80% of your returns. Balance 20% is a top-up coming up out of selection of good assets. And again, there are some interesting strategies which can come up even if with 5 stocks, I have interesting strategies that I work on in terms of even improving the return potential further, right? Which we'll talk about as we go along. Again, I have already created a video on it way back in June 2020 itself in terms of how I could deploy that strategy between March 2020, the collapse of the market, and June 2020 itself. So market throws opportunities all the time. It's for us to sense them. Now the problem is if you have too wide a portfolio spread with too small quantities, you will not be able to execute it. So that's where the conviction of buying comes in. And that's where cushioning your investments also which will come in. So in session 4, I'm going to talk about some of those methods in which you can create a cushion for your own investment so that it becomes a very good mind management tool for you. So I'll elaborate that in session 4. Again, I have to incentivize you to come back, right? So again, there is a schema in which I'm unfolding this, so I'm just joking. So the point is that if you are able to see the pendulum at work, right, you don't even need a third scheme. At the most, what is going to happen? When you exit, you're going to pay 10% capital gains tax. And if you start working on a pipeline idea, what I mean by pipeline idea is, if you're always invested in these 2 schemes, you'll always be into long term. You'll never be into short term because you're always moving money, right? So, and you don't have to move the whole money unless it's really a gung-ho bullish situation like 2007, right? Or you are able to anticipate a very, very bullish situation unfolding. So I'm also going to talk about when to exit, how much to exit. So that part is also very important. Last time we discussed this, that in investing, one of the most important criteria is exit. But access to exit itself is not sufficient. Actually exiting is also important. Otherwise what happens is we all know that there is an access to exit, but we never exit, right? So this discipline of exiting is also very important. Now, if you are able to start seeing this pendulum at work, right, you can actually manage your money with very superior returns with only those two schemes, right, without much of an effort. So that is something we can think about, and you can also explore this. So the point is that you can actually move to further simplification to portfolio 3 as much as possible, right? So gradually you should endeavor to move from portfolio 1 to portfolio 3, right? Okay, so now I'm going to talk about an interesting concept called as time value of money, right? I think my friend Uday is here, who is a chartered accountant himself. Kamalji is also from finance, and I'm sure many of you are already familiar with this, right? We also have Nitin at the back and Ajay, of course. So, but nonetheless, I'm just going to talk about it quickly because time value is also a very important idea that we always have to keep it at the back of our mind when we are in investing journey, right? So the tool which I have developed, which I'm going to share with you before we close today, is based on this time value idea. So we need to start thinking about how the same idea can be applied, right? An example, if you exit a stock today at 1800 rupees, I'm saying hypothetically, okay? And if you get an opportunity to enter into that stock again at that price or lower a year and a half later, right? You already saved money. Amount to amount, it is the same. But from a value perspective, if you have exited today, you have invested somewhere else, and you are able to again buy back that share a year and a half later, you already saved 1.5 years of your opportunity cost. Now that idea comes from time value of money. Also, a suggestion was made that quite often people invest in real estate thinking that it's a great investment opportunity. How do we analyze it? A suggestion was made. So I have created one example here today, right? So that, and again, I'll make that file available so that those of you who are interested can analyze that further, improve upon it. This is obviously in a session like this, I have to make a simplified example, right? But you can elaborate that a little more. Like those of you who are interested in terms of how EMI are calculated, I have given you a very detailed example of car loan, housing loan in that YouTube video. So we all have learned this idea of compounding of interest in our school days, right? Chakrawad Vyas, Chakravruddhi, depending on the medium that we have all learned, right? So interest as an idea is important, but in investing, discount as an idea is also equally important. Because when you value assets, so I'm going to talk about each one of them a little more, but very quickly, interest is something which gets applicable when we travel from history to present or from present to future, right? So this is an x-axis. You'll see to the left-hand side minuses, to the right-hand side pluses. Left-hand side means history, right-hand side means future. So when we travel from history to today or from today to future, we travel in the direction of interest. But when we want to travel in the opposite direction, in real life, we don't have that choice. In real life, we can only travel in the direction of left to right. But in financial calculations, we have the choice of traveling the other way, right? From future into today, if you wish to. So interest and discount are two sides of the same coin, really. So I'm going to elaborate on these concepts very quickly. The idea of future value is to essentially travel from today into the future, right? Which is what we all learned in the school. So I don't have to elaborate this formula a lot. A future value is equal to the present value multiplied by 1 plus r being the rate of return, raised to n. Right? We all learned this compounding formula in the school days. This formula is useful for us to calculate the maturity amounts of things that we are going to invest today. For example, if you are going to invest a lakh of rupees into a cumulative deposit scheme and you just want to counter check whether the bank's calculation is right, you can apply this formula. And again, you can apply this formula in a way that you are in sync with the compounding that is being done by the bank. So you have to check with them how frequently they are going to compound. Are they going to compound monthly? Then you should be very happy. But most likely they will compound quarterly. Right? So 6% compounded quarterly and 6% compounded monthly will give you two different amounts because the cycle is going to repeat faster in case of month. I'm not going to get into too much of calculation here because I have already created a video on time value. So those of you who are interested, I'll share the link and you can study the time value idea more in detail, right? But I'm just introducing that here today, right? But the other one is very important, though we did not study this in the school. In the school, we only studied the direction of interest. We were not taught the direction of discount. But the whole valuation business works on discounting. Why? Because you invest your money in an asset today, it is going to give you returns in the future. Whether it's going to give you dividends or whether it's going to give you rent or whether it's going to give you interest is all going to give you in the future. Now, you are going to take the investment decision today. So you have to make an assessment of the value of what you're going to get in the future from today's perspective. I'll show you with an example, so don't worry about it. Okay? So the point I'm making is that in investing decisions, it is not the earlier slide which is very important. It is this slide which is very important. Again, I have created videos on how to use time value for valuation of equity, for example. Which are the different models which are available for valuation of equity using simple growth assumptions. All those videos are available and I'll share them in the description link, and on both the channels we'll put them up. So those of you who are interested in seeing how the valuation is done, preliminary, valuation is a vast topic, so I'm not claiming that they will give you the whole insight, but at least it will give you a working insight on how valuation works. And today we're going to see that valuation of a bond using this idea of present value. I'm going to anyway show you. I'm also going to take an example of investment in a real estate and use this concept of present value. So what are we doing in a present value? What we are saying is, if you're going to get some money in the future, what is its today's value? I'll give you an example. Suppose a relative of yours takes an amount of a lakh of rupees as a friendly loan from you. Okay? And gives you a choice, as if doing a favor to you, that he or she will return it back to you either 1 year later or 3 years later. Now, assume that in either situations, you can take that person's word as final. So you don't have any credit risk. Okay? But you still have a choice of collecting money either 1 year later or 3 years later. So which one will you choose? 1 year. Right? What is the logic for that? Your answer is right, but what is the logic for that? Earlier the better, right? If I am going to receive something 1 year later, I can invest it for 2 years, right? So intuitively we can all think right. But financially, how do we calculate this? For financially calculating and deciding which one is better, we can actually apply this formula to 1 lakh in both the situations and change the n, which is the number of years. In one case it will be 1, in another case it will be 3. Now the amount that you will get in both those cases will show that if you were to get something 1 year later will have higher value than if you were to get something 3 years later. Because here in this formula, the future value is divided by 1 plus r raised to n. It is not multiplied by 1 plus r raised to n. So naturally, because r is positive, we are in an economy where interest rates are positive, the whole arithmetic will undergo a complete change if you're in Japan or Germany, right? Where interest rates are negative, right? Where you have to pay the bank to safekeep your money. So it's a paradigm which is beyond us. Here, the bank compensates us for giving our hard-earned money to them. So, of course, I'm showing this calculation in our context, not in a Japanese or a German context. But in our context, earlier I collect, the better it is. Right? And arithmetically, I can calculate this by putting F, 1 lakh, in the numerator, dividing it by, say, if my opportunity is 8%, 1 plus 0.08, 0.08 stands for 8%, raised to 1 in one case and raised to 3 in another case. And naturally, in the second case, the present value of that will be less than in the first case. And therefore, we'll choose the 1 year option. Right? Now, this simple principle can be used for valuing an asset or for valuing a bond or valuing your investment in real estate. Right? And make an assessment whether it is really worth investing in this or not. Right? Which is what we're going to see. Okay? So, what we will do is, I think, considering that we have limited time, I will very quickly go through this slide and directly go to that example, because that example will be exciting for us. So here we are looking at assessing real estate investment viability using time value. Time value is a versatile concept. Quite often people go by their judgment that, my property is going to appreciate 2 times at the end of 10 years. Fine. But put that into an Excel template and see for yourself what is the arithmetic that it is working out to. Right? That's the objective of this template. Do you think this will be of interest to you? Okay. So as we have already discussed, every asset has value because of the future cash flows, rent, interest, dividend, realization on sale of that asset, etc. Real estate has value because of the future rental cash inflows and possible property appreciation. But there are challenges of non-occupancy. You cannot guarantee that always your property can be rented. There are incidental costs such as property taxes, society outgoings, upkeep and maintenance. Every time you find a new tenant, you'll have to paint the whole thing, right, etc. So let us see how this works through an example. So I'll again exit this and we will try one example. I only hope that you will be able to see the nuances. I'll again focus on this as much as possible. 1 second. I think it's still not closed. So I'll close it for now. Okay. So, are you able to see this? Yes. So let me again make it bigger. Are you able to see this part clearly? First of all, when we make an assessment of investment in real estate, we have to think about how we are going to finance it, right? So you're going to finance it from 2 sources. Let's say you are eligible for a loan, but you're also going to put your own equity into it, which means your own savings. Okay? Let us say that you put 20% of your savings and you put 80% by way of loan. Quite often people get excited with the lower interest rates which are currently prevailing, right? Which is fine. Let us say you are able to borrow at 7%. But what you have to also factor is the opportunity cost of investing somewhere else. If you have not put your money into that real estate, you would have done something with it. And even by putting into an index fund, as we're going to see more in detail, you could easily generate a return between 13 to 16%. If you are, in certain time periods, it can be phenomenally high. So those who would have put money into an index fund at the time of the COVID meltdown would have generated 100% return in 1 year, right? So let us take a practical 12% opportunity cost. That means you could generate a 12% return. So what is the weighted average cost of funds for you? when you're going to invest in this property. It is not 7%, it is 8%. That is first thing we need to realize, right? Because there is a cost of equity attached to it. After that, let us look at a few estimations. Let us say that you are investing 100 lakhs in this property. Let us say that the rental you can realize in the first year. Now we can play around with these numbers, that's not a problem. So they're not rigid. And again, I'm going to share this in the drive so you can make further improvements. But I have assumed that it will give you 15,000 rupees of rent per month. We can change it if you think it's offending. We can put 2,40,000 if you want, no problem. Let's assume a likely growth of 6%, right? But there will be society outgoings of say 3,000 rupees per month, right? But those are also going to increase from year to year, 5%. And let's assume that you are able to sell it at 50% higher price at the end of 10 years. Because finally you have to assume a horizon. You cannot assume it to be indefinite, that I'm going to hold this property forever, because you're not looking at this for your residence. You're looking at as an investment. So you must have, any investment that you do, you need to have a time horizon, right? Equity is the only exception, right? Where your horizon can be open-ended. But in most other asset classes, you have to have a horizon. So let's say you have a 10-year horizon and you're going to get, let's say, 50% jump in this. But I also need to make an assumption about occupancy rate. Would my property be always occupied? Let's assume it's 90%. So 90% of the time it's going to be occupied. Okay? So now with that, I can plot the cash flows. So let me show you the cash flows. What I'll do is, I will make this column smaller so that you are able to see it better. Are the numbers visible right up to the end? Yes. So I have plotted these numbers now. Okay. You make an investment at time 0, as we had seen on that time scale. 0 means I make an investment today. That is 100 lakhs. And minus sign indicates it's an outflow. I am putting the money. Now, actually I'm going to get rental every month, but I have not broken this down into month by month. I have rather done it on an annual level, just for understanding the principle. So in the first year, I am going to get, 1.62. Actually, I'm going to get 1.8, but I have factored it with the occupancy of 90%, right? So with 90% probability of occupancy, I will get 1.62 lakhs. But I'll have to, outgoings unfortunately are 100% certain, right? So it is going to be reduced the full amount. So the cash flow which I can get at the end of first year is 1.26 lakhs, and it will keep on changing from year to year. 1.34, 1.42, because I've assumed that the rentals are going to grow at a faster rate than my society outgoings. But I can change that assumption. We can play around with it as we like. And then at the end of the 10th year, I'm going to get 150 lakhs. Now here I have ignored taxation because we wanted to understand the principle, right? So now you have a nice plot of numbers where you can say that I have invested 100 lakhs and I'm going to get a certain amount every year, and I'm going to realize some amount by selling the property. I have not assumed any, after every 5 years you're going to do, a lot of painting. I've not assumed any of that. You can build those nuances here without much effort, right? Now, we will use the same idea of present value, which we just discussed. So, I'll just show you the formula here. You will see that it is the, I'll just check in case anything has been pressed. I just want to show you the formula. I think I'll just try once. Otherwise, I think the key is mapped somewhere. But the formula I'll read out for you. The formula is 1 divided by 1 plus $6. What is $6? $6 is that 8% weighted average cost that we had worked out. And rest to A15. A15 is essentially the year, right? So this factor, it's now showing here, right? So, the factor is nothing else but the application of the formula. What it tells me is that the future amounts are less valuable today. With every passing year, if I'm going to get a certain amount, it's going to be less and less valuable from today's perspective. That is why you see that the factor is actually going down, because it gets compounded by for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and the factor goes down. But the amount is going up, right? Now, if you see the present value that you have invested is today itself, and therefore 100 lakhs is 100 lakhs, but all your future collection of 1.26 is actually worth 1.17, 1.15, 1.13, and so on. And finally, what you're going to realize that so-called appreciation of 150 lakhs is, from today's perspective, is only worth 70 lakhs. Right? So, where are we with this data? Let us see the summary here again. Okay? Here I have used this concept called as NPV, net present value. What is net present value? Net present value is the net result of all the cash flows that we have plotted. Why is it coming negative? Because we have invested 100 lakhs today, but what we are going to recover over the period of next 10 years, including the appreciation in property price, is not worth 100 lakhs. It is less than 100 lakhs. Right? So I'll just show you so that for you to get convinced how this minus has come. The amounts are all positive, but if you take a sum total from 100 onwards, remember this is minus 100, and if you actually take sum total of all the future values, including the final collection that you're going to do, its future value, and take a sum total, that actually comes to minus 19.66. In other words, if you are likely to get only 15,000 as your rental, right? If you're going to have a certain amount of society outgoings, if you're going to get a certain appreciation at the end of that period, which is, it becoming 50% more, of course, we'll go and play around and see what if it were to double. Then what is the return that we're going to get? We'll try that. That's a separate issue. But with my assumptions, I am actually destroying value by investing in this property. Though I am assuming 90% occupancy, which is quite an aggressive assumption, right? You may have phases where you may not be able to rent out at all. That will make it worse. But I am assuming a 90% occupancy, right? Now let's play around. So here there is a summary of NPV that we can see. Now I can play around and say, what if I were to get a rental of 2.4 lakhs? That means I'm able to rent out at 20,000 a month. What happens? NAV is still minus 15. What if we were to assume 25,000 a month? Minus. Right? What if I were to assume that you realize not 150 lakhs, but 75% higher, you are breaking even? In other words, this property is worth, if it appreciates by at least 75% at the end of 10 years, it gives you a rental of at least 30,000 a month to begin with. And assuming that your tenants are so nice that you don't have to paint it in between, right? But if you have to factor that expenditure every 5-6 years of painting, etc., then again the situation will change, right? So I just wanted to give you a flavor in terms of how we need to actually analyze it. And the present value idea helps us to crystallize our thoughts rather than making it, very abstract and thinking that, oh, this property is going to appreciate, it's going to give me rental. But plot the numbers and check whether it is worth. Did you like this discussion? Right? So we will make this file available to you as a part of the Google Drive link. You can download and you can play around also. I have also introduced below the concept IRR. I don't want to spend too much time here. But those of you who are interested, what is IRR? Again, I have created videos about what is IRR, etc. So I'll be very happy to share them. But in the same working, you can also calculate the IRR of this transaction. What is the return that you are going to get out of this, right? So I'll not go into that right now, but I hope this gave you a good flavor. So now I want to focus my energy on bond arithmetic. Why I told you last time that bond prices and interest rates have an inverse relationship, right? Which is what we discussed last time when we looked at the chart, that the bond yields at the time of COVID pandemic had fallen to as low as 5.75%. Last time, some of you may remember, we had discussed it. And now they have gone up to about 6.3%. So when it goes up from 5.75 to 6.3, what is the impact on bond prices is something we need to see through an arithmetic, right? So we are convinced that our corporate bond fund and a gilt fund is actually going to give us less returns in a rising interest rate scenario, which is what we are entering right now, because economy is coming back on track, the credit will increase, interest rates will generally tend to rise. Some of the spillover effects of oil prices at what they are right now and geopolitics around it, etc. And suppose they remain stickily higher, inflation has already inched up, various banks will start gradually tightening. All that is going to push the interest rates up. So today is not the best time to buy a bond fund. As simple as that. Why should I do an SIP? Right? I would rather not invest in a bond fund right now. Simple. But money market funds are likely to do better from now. Why? When interest rates rise, their returns are directly linked with interest rates. So I'll put money to a money market fund. So this asset allocation can be simply done by our observation of what is going around us. So we rather focus on what is going around us rather than splitting hair on whether this scheme is doing better or that scheme is doing better, right? And which NAV is more and which NAV is less, etc. I don't know whether it makes sense, but for me it has worked, right? Okay, so now let me close this file and we will go back to the PPT and then we'll talk about bond arithmetic. So let me put in a slideshow mode and then we will discuss this. Okay, so bond arithmetic. Why does a bond have value? A bond has value because it has a potential to generate a certain interest for us, and it is also going to give us some maturity amount, right? That's why it has value. So bond prices essentially reflect what? Bond prices essentially reflect the present value of all the future interests that you're going to get plus the maturity amount that you're going to get. As simple as that, right? Now, it is again calculated using the same logic of present value is equal to F divided by 1 plus R raised to N. So when interest rates are high, that is R is high, because R is in the denominator, the present value will tend to become lower. If R is lower, because the denominator will shrink, the effective value will grow higher. As simple a logic of that as I just mentioned, right? So higher the interest rate expectations, lower the bond prices. Lower the interest rate expectations, higher the bond prices, right? So we'll see with an example. So let me open the bond arithmetic file and again I'll make this available to you. Okay. So let's assume there is a bond which was issued 10 years ago when the interest rates were very high. Remember the UPI regime of the second UPI, right? Inflation was averaging 10%, interest rates were very high. Last time you may remember we had seen those charts, right? And assume the government had borrowed money at 12.5%. As we had seen that chart in the 90s, government borrowed at 15% also. But I have for simplicity assumed that this bond was issued with a coupon rate of 12.5%. What is coupon rate? The announced rate when the bond was that time sold to the investors. So therefore, every year how much are you going to get by way of interest? You're going to get 125 rupees. Because even if the interest rates have come down today, because the bond was a contract which was created 10 years ago, contractually you are required to pay the same amount of interest of 125, right? And it has another 10 years to go to maturity, right? That means it will mature in 2031, okay? At the time of maturity, you're also going to get 50 extra rupees as a redemption premium. I'm just assuming it, right? So you'll not get 1,000 rupees, you'll get 1,050 rupees. Is everyone clear about what I'm saying? 1,050 you're going to get. So we can plot the cash flow, right? What is my cash flow? Year 1, 125, year 2, 125, year 3, 125, and so on. And in the final year, I'm going to get 1,000 plus, I'm going to get 1,000 plus 125 plus 50. So I'm going to get 1175. Again, we calculate the present value factor. Now this present value factor is going to be calculated using the expectation of the market based on the chart that we have seen. So assume that the expectation of the market is 5.75% during the COVID situation. The bond price will be different than if the expectation is 6.3 today, or if the expectation was 8% tomorrow, right? So we'll try and play around with that, okay? So that we will see, but is the logic clear? The logic is the today's value of that bond is going to be the present value of all the future cash flows duly discounted at the market expectation, okay? Why the market expectation goes up and down is also a result of how well the government is managing its own fiscal responsibility. If the government is very liberal, not bothered about fiscal discipline, the yield will tend to go up. If the inflation is rampant, yield will tend to go up, right? But why do we find this yield of US government bonds as low as 1.5 or 1.6? It's because they have tamed inflation generally over a longer period of time, right? The hyperinflation of Germany about 100 years ago, 1921 to 1930, Germany experienced hyperinflation. How hyper was it? The joke was that you needed so much currency notes to, to actually do trade. People had to store them in gunny bags, right? And if you needed space in the house to have a proper rest in the night, and you had no space for those gunny bags, if you had left those gunny bags outside your house, the risk was the gunny bags will be stolen, not the currency notes. So the thief would run away with the gunny bags, throwing all the currency notes there, right? Or if you entered a cafe for a cup of coffee, you exited that cafe and you felt like having another cup of coffee, the prices would have gone up, right? So from that kind of a hyperinflation, they have tamed it to a very, very nominal inflation today, right? They can't tolerate more than 1%, 1.5% inflation, right? So if the inflation is low, interest rates will be low. And that's why I said last time that as our economy is getting better organized, it is data driven, tax collection is improving, tax rates will keep on coming down, right? As the collection buoyancy is there, right? It will overall result into lower inflation, better management of the economy, but interest rates are also going to fall over a period of time. They may rise for next couple of years, but after that, again the same fall is going to start again, right? So now, let us play around with these numbers and see the impact. Okay, currently let's say the market expectation is 6.3%, and therefore what is the value of the bond? It is 1477.05. How did we get it? It is the sum total of the present values of all the future cash flows, 125 up to 1175. So if you actually take a sum total of all these numbers which are in column D, from 117 onwards to 637, you will actually get a sum total of 1477. Now what happened during the COVID pandemic when the expectation had collapsed to 5.75? Let's try it here. So I'll input 5.75 here. At that time, what was the bond price? It was 1531. But as the interest rate expectation has gone up from 5.75 to 6.3, the bond price has corrected from 1531 to 1477. What if, as I'm expecting, my expectation can go wrong and I reserve that right of going wrong, but suppose the interest rates actually move up to 7% in next 1.5 years, what will happen to the price of the bond? It will go down from 1477 to 1411. Now, if that probability is high, why should I go and invest in a bond fund where I invite a depreciation in my asset value? Yes, I'll get some interest, but that interest will be offset by a depreciating asset price. Why should I invite that? But a stage may come where the interest rates have gone up to 7.5%, and there is a likelihood of that turning down. At that time, the same bond funds will be a great investment where you put that money and you will generate superior returns, not only out of interest, but also because of the appreciation in bond prices, which is what exactly happened during the COVID situation, where these bond funds gave very good returns because the interest rates fell. Are you able to get a sense of how this works? Okay. I'm conscious that my time is already over, but if you allow me, I wanted to show you that tool of how to assess the equity market, reasonableness is a tool which I've been using for the last couple of years. So do you have time and energy, or we should conclude here? Should we go ahead? Okay. Because I'm always concerned about those round red colored fruit which can be thrown at a speaker, right? So, okay, so now let's move forward. So I think I'll go through a little fast through this slide. The only point I wanted to make is that when you are investing in a credit risk fund, which is a corporate bond fund, at least ensure that the mutual fund scheme is investing in bonds which are at least AA rated. The rating is very important. As if we get an opportunity to share the learning note with you all, or I can again put that learning note into the Google Drive of the 4th session, and you can download it. That will make it the easiest. So those who are interested can go there and download the learning note. Okay. In that, I'll give you more details about the rating, what does AAA mean, AA plus mean, and all that. Right now, I'll not take your time. But all that I would say is that at least go for a AA rated bond. Sometimes people get excited with 10.25% return on a bond. Sometimes I get a call from my friends. But rating is only A. Right? Then I tell him, stay away from such temptation. And what is the alternative? The alternative I'm going to talk about very soon, which is about the easy way of increasing our return. So, what is the easy way of increasing our return? Right? So, people are often hunting for safe investment options which can improve their return. Naturally so. Is this bank good or that bank good? We are always hunting. Right? But one thing we forget is any bank that you're looking at, even if it's the best bank or the worst bank, any bank is a subset of the economy. Right? A bank or an NBFC does well because the economy does well. You cannot have a situation where the economy is in doldrums and the bank is doing well. Exceptions are always there. But all banks can never do well if the economy is in doldrums. Right? If this is a simple fact, why don't we invest in the economy? So we have a choice of investing in the economy or lending the money. Now again, I have to apologize to all the bankers. I'm going to get tomatoes and white, round-shaped other commodity also, right? But the point is that I would bet on the economy rather than lend money to an institution. Indian economy, in my view, is a much better bet than any banking institution in the country. Would you agree with me or not? Right? If that is the case, then we should look at in the whole investing in a different way. So by investing in the economy, we get a chance to invest in growth of the economy. So I'll show you some data. Okay. So here is a data which I want to show you. I'll go a little faster so that I will not go every line which I have put in there, but I'll go to the very important part of it. So I am putting before you two sets of data which will make it very easy and simple. In the first table, you will see India GDP in 2002-2003 and 2020-21. Remember, 2020-21 was a bad year for Indian economy. The Indian economy actually degrew, right? Here, I am plotting data based on nominal GDP. What is real GDP and what is nominal GDP? Real GDP is GDP which is measured with reference to a common base year. So, for example, you use 2012-2013 to measure the value of goods and services that you produce in the economy. And whether you are measuring 2018, you are measuring 2016, you are measuring 2015, or you are measuring 2022, you measure them at the prices of 2012-13. Then you get the real GDP growth. So this year we are expecting 9.5% real GDP growth. But what is nominal GDP growth? Whatever is the real GDP growth, topped up by inflation, is the nominal GDP growth. So if the economy on an average is growing at 7% and the inflation is on an average at 5%, real GDP growth is 7%, but nominal GDP growth is 12%. Is everyone clear about this? Right? Which is what the data actually shows. In spite of a bad year, which was a bad year for Indian economy of 2020-21, Indian economy has grown at 12.03% between 2002-2003 to 2020-21. And how much is the Nifty as an index grown? Between 31st of March 2003 to 31st of March 2021, when Nifty was at about 14,690, not even today's level. It was at 14,690. What is the return that index has given to you? 16%. So choice is very clear to us. Do you want to lend at 6% or you want to invest at 16%? Right? The answer is, if we are able to manage our mind monkey, if you are able to manage our mind monkey because of the fluctuation of the pendulum, then the choice is, I invest in an index fund. The answer is very simple. How to manage that mind monkey, I'm going to talk about in session 3 or 4. But some introduction of that I want to give today by showing you a simple tool that I have developed. Would you be interested in seeing that today, or should I cover it in session 3? Today, everybody has the energy to invest another 5 minutes? Okay. So, now, I cannot assume 16% as always the rate of return which will prevail, because it depends on the starting point, it depends on the ending point. So, therefore, I would rather assume a range of 13 to 16%, which is reasonable. Right? Because economy is growing at 12%. So, there is no reason why Nifty will lag behind. Nifty will be ahead of it. But let me assume on the lower side. As I show you data, one of the portfolios actually gave 19% on the index fund. But let's keep that extreme aside. Let me take a range of 13 to 16%. Okay? And use that tool to make an assessment of where the market is today. Right? Which is what I want to show you. So I will now close the PowerPoint. I will directly show you. In fact, I have put that into a slide. So I can remain on this slide. Okay, so let me show you some data. Are you able to see it from the back? No? How do I? Okay. Let me tell you the logic. I'm going to make an Excel file of calculation available to you. So maybe I'll try Excel. Let me just check whether I have that Excel file here. If I have the Excel file, I will pick up the Excel file. No problem. I have that Excel file also, so not a problem. But I think it will still have the same issue. So let me hide some rows or some columns which are not necessary, and try to focus on the critical ones, right? Now I'll increase the size so that is it better? Let me see if I can further do something about it and enlarge this little more, right? So that you don't have to strain your eyes. Is this better? Right. So what I have done here is I have taken major events in the Indian stock market history. Okay, either severe collapse or severe boom time, right? So what I have tried to do is I have used this time value idea of future value, 1 plus r raised to n, right? Now let us look at the scenarios. We'll go row by row. The first row, you may remember that there was a massive rally. Some of you who may have invested in equities earlier, 2004 to 2007, there was a massive rally, and it ended in January 2008 with about 6,287 Nifty. If you were to compound this today at 13% to 16%, what should have been the Nifty today? It should have been at least 34,225 to 49,218. So are we in that kind of a scenario where people have lost their mind? And in some IPOs, yes. But generally speaking, have people lost their mind and have, kind of chasing assets? Not really. People are very skeptical. A lot of people think that market has gone up too much already, right? And that skepticism is good for people like me. As they say, bull markets are always built on skepticism. So more skeptics I meet, I'm more comfortable holding an exposure of 96% to equities, right? It may look counterintuitive, but that is what it is. If there are more skeptics who are thinking that market has gone up too much, I'm more comfortable, right? Because I have to always take a contrary view, right, to make money. Okay, now think of Lehman Brothers collapse, 2008 bottom, right, where the world was absolutely in a mess. The US problem was imported by Europe, right? Luckily, we were saved. Our Reserve Bank has always been prudent. I remember 2006 itself, they are forewarned against property prices rally, and they'd advise banks to go slow on lending to housing sector, right? But in US, that bubble had burst. Now, if you compound from that situation, right, you will find that at 16%, the market today would have been 17,677 at 16%. At 13%, it would have been lower. But are we in such dire straits as a world economy? We are not. As a world economy, we are much better positioned than what we were in 2008-2009 crisis. But it does give me some kind of a benchmark in terms of what is the worst that could have happened, right? So from this perspective, if you look at 16% compounded, Nifty is still in a reasonably good range, right? Nifty closed yesterday at 17,028 or something like that. So it is still within that range, right? Take a situation of the intermediate top which was developed in January 2010, right? Nifty today would have been 22,511 to 30,718. We are nowhere there. Then we had the foreign exchange crisis in 2013. Just before Raghuram Rajan was appointed as the governor, the foreign exchange reserves had collapsed below $300 billion. Today we are at 650 billion, right? Inflation, we had all those kinds of scams breaking out. India's image was much maligned in 2013. We are much better positioned as an economy today, right? India is being looked at as an attractive destination. If you were to look at that as the basis also, the range would have been 14,543 to 18,067. So if you look at the 16%, you're still within that range, right? And when PM Modi came to power in May 2014, again, the levels are all higher than where we are today, right? And that there was an exhaustion of that rally. After Modi ji was elected, there was a massive rally which happened, right? People were very gung-ho about the future. And in one of my talks in Mulund in May 2014, I had said that now we will see an exuberance coming in the market. And if that exuberance really happens, I'm going to exit 20% of my portfolio, is what I had mentioned there. And I got that opportunity in January, February 2015. And then the market again collapsed. From that peak of 9,100, 9,200, we saw again 6,900 levels, right? That was the time there were many other challenges coming up. So this tool helps me to look at where the market is today. And it tells me that considering those dire situations, we are in a much better situation. There are a lot of reforms that have already been put in place. The kind of GST collection, the way it is going up, right? The kind of growth numbers that we're going to see. And as I'm going to explain in either session 3 or session 4, the play of leverage is going to be favorable for companies, which is going to expand their profits, right? So we are not in a situation where we have to be scared about the market, thinking that the market has gone up too much. It's a very reasonably priced market from this perspective. And if you link it up with the growth in the economy, right? From a PE perspective, it may look expensive, right? But the profits also catch up quite quickly. So I created this video in August, which is available on my YouTube channel, when the Nifty level was about 16,800. And I had mentioned that it's a reasonably priced market. It does not give me a panic button to exit, right? And therefore I have stayed invested. It does not mean that the market will go up in a straight line. Market will correct, and these kinds of corrections are very good because bull markets are always built on corrections. If you don't have corrections, if fearful hands don't go out of the market, right, the market is not going to go further up. It's only the fearful people, they have to exit, thinking that, so only then the market will start rising again. So that may be still a couple of weeks ahead of us. By the time we see bottom and again it will start rising. But the point is, it gives me a comfort that I am not in a zone where I need to get scared and sell out of my equity and go away. So this gives you a framework to see, right? This is one of the tools that you can also use. So I'm going to share this file also as a part of the Google Drive. So with that, I'll conclude my today's presentation, but we can again have, like last time, a few questions if you may like to ask. There is one thing I forgot to show you. Shall I quickly show you the total expense ratios being charged by mutual funds? Have you ever studied that, or you would like to have a quick look? Yes or no? Yes. Fine. So let me show you that data. Okay. Again, I'll increase the size so that you're able to see it comfortably. Okay, so now this is the total expense ratio which is charged by the asset management company to a mutual fund. So typically, what is the structure in a mutual fund? There is a mutual fund which is formed like a trust, right? There is an asset management company which manages the money invested in the mutual fund, and there is a trustee company which is supposed to do the oversight that all is being done well. So asset management company employs fund managers, analysts, all the administrative staff, distribution, whatever advertising they have to do, etc., and that is charged to the scheme. So now if you see the index fund about which I mentioned earlier, what is the charge which is being levied? It is 0.4% if you go through an advisor. If you go directly, it is 0.2%. In fact, in this mutual fund, it was 0.2 and 0.1 till recently. Now a lot of people have started flocking to index funds. They have doubled the expense ratio. But even after doubling, it is very reasonable. In other words, if you have to invest a lakh of rupees, the asset management company will charge you 0.2% of that, which is 200 rupees for taking care of your 1 lakh rupees, which is not bad, right? Now, what will happen to the managed funds? If you see, again, this file also I'll share with you. This will vary from mutual fund to mutual fund. I have downloaded from one of the funds. I don't want to name it. You can always download from any mutual fund. Now, if you go through, if you look at the credit risk debt fund that I had earlier talked about, right? What is the charge which is being levied if you go through an advisor? It is 1.61%. That means on a lakh of rupees, it will be 1,610 rupees, right? If you go directly, it will be 970 rupees. So there's quite a significant difference. Now, if you go to more complicated schemes, multi-asset fund, long-term advantage fund, as if all other schemes are disadvantage schemes. So, but whatever it is, right? It is 2.22% and 1.77%. So your 1 lakh rupees, you will have to pay 2,220 rupees for managing your money. And at the end, the fund manager may not perform as per the index. Now, whether you want to take that risk or you want to go for a low expense ratio scheme where you know that your money is going into the largest companies in India, I think I would rather, make the choice of putting money into an index fund, right? So that's why I told you that they have actually very quickly increased the fees, right? Because a lot more money globally has started moving to index funds rather than to the managed funds. So because expenses are high, obviously they have to invest a lot of their time in selecting stocks, and then only 8 to 20% probability that they will beat the index at the end of it. So index fund is a much better. You can track as per how the index is performing and take your decisions also much more easily. So I'll conclude here with your permission, and we can take a few questions. Thank you very much. Perhaps you may like to study the files a little more. So I'll be happy to take questions next time also, because we'll make those files available to you when the video is uploaded. But yeah.
You said about that portfolio, only two. You are using only two funds.
Yes.
I think you said
money market fund and index fund. Correct.
So how often you switch, and on what basis you are going to switch it?
Right. So basically, what happens is that because they're not very literate, what I have done for them is I have educated them in terms of how to invest in a mutual fund. So whenever they have surplus, 1,000 rupees, 2,000 rupees, I have educated them to go and put that money into the money market fund. So money market fund is a great parking place, right? It is very low risk, right? Whatever is happening in the interest going up or going down, it will always give you a positive return. Like a bond fund or a gilt fund, bond funds and gilt funds, you may also find that today's NAV is less than yesterday's NAV. But that will never happen in a money market fund. So they go and put that money there, right? And then as I observe the market and the market movements, for example, if whatever accumulation they have done between last time and now, I can use the entry point now. As I sense that the bottoming process is going on, I can move that money into the index fund, right? So that choice I exercise. So the point I was earlier making was that as you observe the market movements, and we're going to talk about it in the next session more in detail in terms of the waves that keep on happening, why do those waves happen, etc. But as we start observing those waves, it's up to us to take advantage of those waves. So there's no point in me telling them that go and put your money into an index fund whenever you have a surplus, right? They may go and invest at the worst time. So the safest place to put money is money market fund, where I'm not exposing them to the market risk. And I would move the money whenever there is an opportunity. Now, I have not aggressively used this switching strategy in their case because, for them also, they should not get confused what's happening. But I'm telling you that that's a great way of managing your portfolio with only two, right? When the exuberance is a little too high, and that opportunity you'll always get every year, right? You can exit and you can again make an entry. So you can switch money from an index fund to a money market fund and switch it back from a money market fund to an index fund, even without bringing into your bank account. So only you have to provision for your taxes, whatever work out. But if you use a pipeline idea, and I'll elaborate that pipeline idea in the learning note, simple idea is that a pipeline means that you keep on investing in the same scheme and exiting from the same scheme. So typically, once you cross the long-term threshold, your taxation becomes quite low, right? Once you have crossed 3-year threshold for a money market fund, right? Whenever you sell those units, you're going to be hit with only the long-term taxation. Similarly, when you switch money into an index fund, if you cross 1 year, you're going to take advantage of that 10% rate rather than 15% rate. So, because in tax, you follow the first in, first out principle. Whatever has come in first will be taxed first. So, because of that, you can create a pipeline and you don't have to necessarily exit whole hog. You can also, do in small lots till you develop a comfort, or till the markets really zoom to an extreme like in 2007 or 2010, right? Or it also happened in 2018 a little bit. And we may see that happening again a couple of years down the line. So that time you may exit totally, even if whatever taxation have to be paid, taxes you pay and get out, right? That kind of a time zone can also come. And that tool, the Excel tool that I have developed, can actually start giving us an indication that if the markets have really gone up too beyond for a comfort, then we have to really start thinking whether how much should I exit. Right now, that tool tells me that we have miles ahead of us, in terms of a bull market. So I can remain invested in equities and I can confirm that with what is going around me. So things which are going around me are positive, right? We have a strong central government. Our ranking in the nations is going up in so many different ways, right? The business climate is very good. Taxes have got lower, right? Tax compliances are improving. Government's fisc, in spite of all the challenges, is well managed. Now, banks' balance sheets have been cleaned up. This is potent for a bull market, right? So we will see that unfolding, but we can keep a track in terms of whether it is going absolutely to unreasonable levels. That is the time when we may have to exit completely. But otherwise, you can even book profits on 20-25% of it. And that builds a nice pipeline for you. And that gives you that extra delta over and above whatever is the index which is going to give you. Right? That's how you can work with those two schemes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, should we call it a day? Thanks a lot for your patient participation. Thank you.